One of the experiences I trust every homebrewer shares is the feeling of awe that comes from witnessing the conversion of wort into beer through the fermentation process. Even after 15 years, I still get giddy when I see the first signs of airlock activity, a nice fluffy kreuzen developing on top of my beer. The worst is when this takes too long. You all know the anxiety that comes from checking on a batch a day after pitching and seeing no action. This is why we love Imperial Yeast, who pack 200 billion cells of the purest yeast into each pitch-right pouch, which assures quick starts, healthy fermentation, and predictably great results. I strongly urge all of our listeners to check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer and let them know that you appreciate their support of the Brülosophy Podcast while you're at it. All right, on to the show. Up until the late 19th century or so, the good majority of beer styles came from regions with long histories of brewing, places like England, Belgium, and of course Germany with their easy drinking lagers. America being the melting pot it was, brewers emigrating from these regions brought along the brewing practices they'd been using, though were forced to make some concessions given certain environmental differences and of course lack of technology. And while this most certainly led to some poor outcomes, it's also responsible for one of the first truly American beer styles. You're listening to the Brülosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me to talk about the style known as California Common is contributor Malcolm Frazer.
This style is near and dear to my heart, as your Short and Shoddy article alludes that it is also to yours.
Oh, yes.
Because of we'll get into that a little bit later, I'm sure, but this is one of the few beers that I brewed early on and over in Hawaii and kind of carried it over, and then I started brewing it again back in like 15 and 16, and this is the beer I won a GABF medal with. So
cool. I forgot about that, and we actually got to taste that. I think I got to sample that version of your Cal Common.
Yeah, I had a few of it for the room, and it was a cool event because most of the guys from the brew crew were there, so it was kind of cool to win with some friends in the audience. So.
Hell yeah. Well, you can't have a conversation about California Common or what we call Cal Common without talking about Anchor Steam's or Anchor Brewing Steam beer, which I think most people just refer to as Anchor Steam, which like many was my first introduction to the style. We're going to be spend some time talking about Anchor a bit later, but suffice to say my experience with Anchor Steam was what ultimately influenced me to start brewing Cal Common myself, and I've made numerous batches. Like you, it's near and dear to my heart. It's one of my favorite styles. One of the later batches that I've made, I did using some pretty blasphemous methods. So we're going to talk about that a bit later as well. All right, if you like what we're up to and you want to help keep us doing it, consider becoming a patron of Brülosophy. By committing to a small monthly pledge over at patreon.com/Brülosophy, you'll receive rewards like access to unpublished recipes, unique discounts to YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invite to a monthly live Q&A session with someone in the brewing world. Coming up next month is Beersmith developer Brad Smith, who also hosts the great Beersmith podcast. Brad's a great guy who can answer questions about Beersmith, recipe design, and a whole host of other homebrewing topics. All past sessions are available on our private Facebook page, so you can go back and watch them whenever you like. You can learn more about becoming a patron over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. Feedback this week is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who have an array of amazing purpose-built stainless brewing products to improve your brew day. If you're looking for a high-quality pilot brewery, make sure to check out the BH15 single-tier system. This thing is absolutely beautiful. It comes with a hard plumb manifold to eliminate all hosing changes during the brew process. Head over to brewershardware.com to see what they're all about, and make sure to mention Brülosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. Again, that's brewershardware.com. Listener Adam Joyce had some feedback on our recent episode where we talked about fermentation temperature with Kvike yeast. Malcolm, I don't know if you've played with Kvike yeast much.
Yeah, just a couple brews, and I also just went to the Kvike Fest up in Chicago, which was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I bet it
guys
was.
You might meet on Milk the Funk and other sites like that. It was pretty awesome. Lars Garsol was there. He did
awesome
a presentation. It was awesome. Yeah, it was a lot of good people. It's a different crowd, man. It's definitely a different crowd.
Those Kvike guys, right?
It's like where mead meets beer. There's a lot of Viking allusions and stuff like that,
Well, Adam Joyce, in his feedback from that episode, he says it was mentioned that Kvike might have their own flavor, so Kvike yeasts. Absolutely, it does, at least to me. I've made probably 25 beers with various strains. Some are good and some aren't. Yeah, it's cool that you can toss a shitload of heat at it and it finishes in a couple days, but man, it certainly tastes way different in an IPA than other of the usual suspects, at least to me, he says. some strains are orange bombs and some are a bit cleaner. Just my 2 cents. I have to agree with Adam. There's something about the whole Kvike movement. That's what I'm referring to it as, that I find kind of interesting. And I mentioned this in that show, but it's like, because it can ferment so warm, it's like people have been given permission now to do that. And so we don't look at it, I guess, in the same light that we do other strains. And to me, the beers that I've tasted that were fermented with Kvike strains, whether they were Oslo or Hornindal or Voss or whatever it was, do taste unique. They have a uniquely Kvike flavor. So I guess I agree with Adam on that.
Yeah, I think a lot of them do for sure, and especially if people really push the limits of temperature. I say it tastes like bad orange juice, which is not necessarily complimentary.
I was going to say,
yeah. But some of the strains, when it's tamed back a little bit, high 70s, 80s, they're very clean, and so to me, high 70s, low 80s is very achievable for most people. And I think that's for me, my palate, where the sweet spot is because it can take a little bit of temperature abuse and still make a fine beer, especially I think Voss in particular. Hornindal as well. But
yeah, I actually agree with you. The fact that you can take this yeast, not have temp control, ferment for the most part, ferment in your garage and create a fine beer, I think is pretty neat. I've yet to have an example of a Kvike fermented beer, whether that's IPA or Vienna lager or, something like that I prefer over the one fermented with, I guess, a more traditional strain. That's just kind of my experience with it. But.
Yeah. There was quite a few good examples of Kvike being used for hazy type pale ales.
Totally. Yeah.
And they were very complimentary. The brewers who made use of those higher esters interplaying with the hops, I thought really nailed it. Some of the older raw ales, with potentially some botanicals, not my jam. I get that this popular, and might have been traditional, with juniper, etc. Very cool to try some of those. It was interesting to see what people liked.
Yeah,
but I think the yeast are the I guess it is yeast. Kvike literally means yeast, but the yeast from that area. Is opening a new window and it's bringing a different crowd in. I think, which is awesome.
I couldn't agree more. And kind of my final thoughts on it. I'm not a huge fan of most hazy IPA. Just personal preference. The ones that I've had that have been fermented with Voss are actually pretty good. I think it does work well in that style, like you said. And I think a lot of people are noting that, it does seem to produce this kind of orange character, which to me if that's kind of your base yeast character, goes really well with massive amounts of hops and, that style in general. So, well, thanks for the feedback, Adam. If you have any show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brülosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. These days, the mention of lactose in brewing conjures images of hazy, sweet milkshake IPA. However, the most common usage to my memory up until a couple years ago was in milk stout, a sweeter version of the much beloved dark style that purportedly used to be viewed as a nutritious drink. Batch Brewing out of Sydney, Australia makes a version they call Elsie the Milk Stout, and I was lucky enough to score a can when my friend Paul Nicodem stopped by a few weeks ago.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
Look at this dark ass stout.
I'm so sick of dark beers.
It's a very dark beer.
This could even be good, and I'm just tired of them.
It's kind of watery.
What?
It's like a coffee roast, but it's kind of watered down.
Is it
the
best
good.
part about waking up?
It's not Eubin.
Eubin?
Eubin.
What's Eubin?
It's a coffee.
You've been making stupid fucking things on the radio.
It's not bad.
I just don't even. I'm just over the dark beers. I'm over them. They're so pretentious.
It has definitely coffee aftertaste going.
Ooh, wow. Okay, hang on. I know what to do.
Do it.
I know what to do.
Just do it.
Okay, here's my first impression. You know when you order tea and you meant iced tea, sweet tea, and it's unsweetened, you're like, whoa, it still tastes like it, but it's unsweetened. That's my first impression. It tastes like the coffee roast dark beers, but it's a little bit unsweetened and watered down. Yeah, you're like, there should be a little extra flavor, and there's not. Unsweetened. This is an unsweetened coffee roast.
So I said all that with less words.
You did. I make fun of you a lot, and we banter, and I crush you a little bit here and there because I'm a little bit of a bully, but I love you, man.
Oh, I love you too.
And I respect your opinion. You are a learned fucking man. Cheers. You nailed that. Yeah, that's what I get.
I don't mind it at all.
Yeah, I can drink it. It's just I'm so used to getting so much coffee and like sweet flavor out of these beers that the absence of it is maybe just a little confusing. Kind of like when you get an unsweet tea, it's just a little confusing. You're like, I mean, I could drink this, right? You're like, unsweet tea, I can drink it. I'm thirsty.
A little more sweet would be good.
But
the more I drink it, though,
I'm just not used to it. And the more I drink it, the more I start to like it as well.
Yeah.
In fact, I may even prefer it. Like, didn't I just say that dark beers are too pretentious? I like this. It's not trying to do that. Wow, did we just do a 180?
It's actually, it's very good.
No, I'm starting to like this a lot, dude. In fact, I'm loving this.
Yeah, the watered down is gone, and you start tasting the flavor.
So there's our review. Unsweet tea. Well, you maybe not order it, but if you drink it, you're like, whoa, that's unsweet tea. And after a while, you're like, this is refreshing and delicious. And why don't I like unsweet tea? I'm fat anyways. I don't need that.
Yeah, it's good.
I love this beer. I'm going to go so far as to say this is my new favorite dark beer.
Wow.
I hope that it's a home brewer because that means
too.
that person is friggin' awesome. But if it's not, that means that I can buy more of this.
Yeah, it's good.
It's the pancake breakfast. We do it every year, Ron.
Cheers.
10 jerseys.
Yeah, we'll go with 10. That's 13.
I did not expect the guys to respond so positively to this beer. It makes me think that maybe I should brew one up. I've made one milk stout in my life, in my brewing day. I feel like maybe I should brew one up for the guys to drink. They seem to really enjoy this one.
Yeah, milk stout. It is good. And it does you good. I think it was the Marston's stout, milk stout, something like that. I probably screwed that up, but I love the style. I think putting lactose in everything is pretty gross, and especially some of the IPAs, it just doesn't work for me. I had it when it's good, but in a milk stout or in a stout has moderate roasty, the one that lactose, a little bit of lactose, it's kind of like an undefined sweetness. It's very soft sweetness, if that makes sense. Because if you look at the sweetness scale, lactose sugar is pretty far down. Yeah. So I just love it. I think it plays well. And that's why people put cream in coffee and cream in tea. Right. It kind of knocks it down a little bit. Eminently drinkable. Just good beer. And especially with this medium strength, in the 5s, up to 6 or so. You get big, and I don't know, everyone wants to make everything big. But
yeah. Well, this particular milk stout, the ones that I've tasted, I'm not. It's not like I'm going around seeking out milk stout. That's not. But I will usually try it if I see it at a pub or a brewery.
Sure.
Usually, when I think of lactose in a beer, I think of it as adding body. Kind of rounding out the flavor profile of the roast. But really, contributing to that a fuller mouthfeel and more body. This my experience with LC the milk stout was sort of opposite that. It was, I don't want to say it was thin, but it certainly didn't have the that kind of thickness that I expect from a milk stout. Yeah, but in a weird way,
someone said that. Who was it that said that was thin? Was it Jersey?
One of the guys, I think, said that they experienced it as being thin, but that contributed to the drinkability. I mean, it made it so crushable.
A lot of people nitrogenate milk stouts too, kind of leading to that creaminess, playing off of that.
Sure, so,
Like Left Hand, famously, milk stout.
Yeah, that's a great beer, by the way.
Yeah, it is.
Their Left Hand. So anyways, the beer was really good. I batch, we've got a few more that we reviewed thanks to Paul. And so far they're hitting it out of the park. I was able to go to batch brewing when I was in Sydney a couple years ago. Rad brewery. If you're around the Sydney area, you got to go check them out. So thanks again, Paul, for bringing me all those beers. If you'd like to have your beer or any other fermented beverage reviewed by Jersey and Tim on the show, you can email me, Marshall@Brülosophy.com, and we'll get you all set up. When we return from this break, the focus will be on the steamy style we call California Common. So I've been hanging out with brewers and craft beer nerds for a long time now, and while we do occasionally have our differences, one thing it seems we all share is a love of learning and trying new things, as well as saving a couple of bucks. Well, right now, Craft Beer and Brewing is helping fans of Brülosophy learn more while saving some coin by offering 20% off the price of a subscription to their awesome magazine. Chock full of brewing insights, tips, and recipes from industry experts, Craft Beer and Brewing is seriously great. I read every issue page to page myself. To get 20% off your subscription, all you have to do is sign up at beerandbrewing.com/Brülosophy. Want to brew quality craft beer at home? The Grainfather provides a brewing system with superior design, innovative features, and the latest technology, allowing you to brew professional quality craft beer at home. Mash, sparge, boil, and cool all in one unit, meaning there's less equipment to use, clean, and store. No need for burners or hot plates. Just plug it in and brew great beer. Then get the best out of your fermentation with the Grainfather conical fermenters and glycol chiller. Plus, enhance your brewing experience with the brand new free-to-use Grainfather community app. You can take your brewing tools and your recipes with you everywhere, use brewing calculators on the fly, manage your recipes, and monitor your brew session from anywhere. Use your mobile device to manage your Grainfather brew wirelessly, automate mash schedules, and multitask without removing any of the brewing hands-on fun. Grainfather products can all be found at www.grainfather.com. Plus, as a Brülosophy Podcast listener, get 10% off your order. Just use discount code Brülosophy19 at checkout. That's BRULosophy19 to receive 10% off your order. So head to shop.grainfather.com now to get this great deal. Chilling work can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the Exchillerator Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clear wort in the fermenter. Brülosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the Exchillerator Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every Exchillerator comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to exchillerator.com today. I moved to California in 2004, about a year and a half after I started brewing, and really got into beer. Where I live now, one of the easiest craft beers to find on store shelves is Anchor Steam. It's pretty much everywhere you go, and to this day, I still absolutely love drinking it. Now, the Anchor Brewery is in San Francisco, so just a few hours away from the studio here in Fresno, and of the many things that Anchor is known for, being the originators of the California Common style is perhaps the biggest. To me, not just as a California beer lover, but an American, I find the history of the style pretty fascinating.
Yeah, so as I'm wont to do and be contrarian, I'm not really sure that Anchor invented the style.
I was wondering if you were going to bring that up.
They may get credited with it,
yeah.
and to me, Anchor is maybe along with Sierra Nevada, like the two most revered American breweries, in the U.S.
Yeah.
On the Mount Rushmore of beer, if it were to be companies, or if it were people, Fritz Maytag and Ken Grossman obviously would be up there. But as if it were breweries instead, the same applies.
Well, right. Fritz Maytag being the guy who was behind Anchor Brewery.
Well, he rescued it in the 60s.
Right.
So they've been making that beer since like 1896. Well, this beer, maybe earlier. I'm not 100% sure on that date, but this beer was being brewed in the 1840s, in particularly 1849, the Gold Rush era, and that's when it came about. So there was up to 25 different breweries making this beer, that we can actually list off. So there was probably many more.
Sure.
But they were, one of the better, and sometimes if you win, you get to write the history books. So I'm just not sure. I wish we had the American beer version of Rotten Pattinson to say so.
Right.
And I just don't have the time right now to get into the catalog. But so very popular. And what I love about the beer is, as you said in the beginning, it might be one of the truly indigenous beers to the U.S., along with cream ale. And when I first read that, like the first beer indigenous to the United States, I thought, well, hold on a second. If you remember, several months ago, we talked about pumpkin beer.
Mm-hmm.
That was probably the first beer indigenous to the Americas, because they brought over ale brewing and they used ingredients they had with them. Because that's often how it happens, right? You bring the style as you don't have all the ingredients you had, so you use what you have.
Yeah.
Same thing probably happened with steam beer, but now it's the United States, because when the first settlers came over, it wasn't United States, not until 1776.
Yeah.
So here's all these Northern Europeans coming over for the gold rush and bringing the beers that they knew with them. But what they didn't have was temperature control. That wasn't until like 1870, and I'm not even sure it got all the way over to the West Coast by then. But so commercial refrigeration wasn't widespread, and they didn't have easy access to like ice caves and maybe super cold water. Although that seems kind of funny because San Francisco Bay is right there.
Yeah, nippy.
If you've ever been, what is it? The coldest winter you'll ever know is the summer in San Francisco.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
But so for whatever reason, they ended up saying, okay, we have this lager yeast. We know how to brew lagers, and we don't have traditional caves, so we're going to pump it up to the rooftop and use cool ships, because that was a known process back then.
Yeah.
And then supposedly, this warm ale being pumped to the rooftop created steam. That's one of the stories of why it's steam beer. The other one is perhaps because the beer was very highly carbonated. When the publicans had to bleed it off, it caused like a loud hiss, like a steam engine, and a lot of and a lot of noise, and maybe some like pomp and circumstance from the ceremony of tapping the keg.
Huh.
So that was one of the other theories about why it was steam beer. And maybe perhaps same with bottles. When you opened it, it was highly carbonated, so it would effervesce and steam.
Well, yeah, and you get that little puff of CO2 smoke or whatever, steam, if you will. The story that I heard was the first one that you said, right? That when they'd pump this hot wort up to the cool ships, and the steam would be leaving the brewery at night. I have images of like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and the like the industrial
this ethereal smog. It's like what is that? It's obviously potion magic. Right,
exactly.
I'm surprised a religion didn't spring out because of it. But what's really neat is like I like this, the whole like this histories of these styles, and you can almost do like these Venn diagrams of some of these styles, right?
Yeah.
So if you go look at Dampfbier from Germany, which is a Bavarian style, and then you look at Altbier, and then look at perhaps British bitters, and then if you put Kalkomen steam beer in that, there's a lot of overlap. And there's little things that don't line up. Like obviously, like the lager yeast for the steam beer versus the top fermenting ale yeast of the alt beers. Dampf beer used mainly, I think, Hefeweizen.
That's my understanding.
If you look at the histories of all of them, it has some story about, okay, this was a beer made for the commoner, hence the name common. Just like Kentucky Common. They used the ingredients they had. Dampf beer is the same thing. It's like, we used, European malts and the yeast that was available, probably Hefeweizen. And because it was common, it was a lesser labor or drink, they used the yeast that was easy to use and easy to handle, which was Hefeweizen yeast. Didn't take a lot of storage, fussiness, and you could ferment it warm. Same thing with alt beer. Same thing with, some of the early bitters. They weren't super expensive beers, and they were for like the everyday person. Not quite like a porter, but same idea. The California Common beer used the ingredients they had. They used the technology they had available. They used the knowledge they had from back home, and they used lager yeast probably because they had it, and they improvised with the cool ships. So they end up making a lager fermented at warmer temperatures, which coaxed out some esters, but not to the extreme of an ale. But it also had no sulfur because it was a pretty vigorous fermentation. And then over time, as they selected that yeast to be used again, it became its own thing.
Yeah.
So I just like that, the overlaps, and how, people will do as they do and say, I take what I know, but I use what I have.
Yeah. Yeah. It's brewers' innovation. And I love how, I don't know how known it is that Anchor is fermenting, and they do more than just their steam beer, but they're fermenting with what is technically a Pastorianus strain, yeast strain. So, a traditional lager strain, and they're fermenting at 60 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Somewhere
I don't know
around
the actual temperature for that one. So at Fatheads, we have 2 open fermenters, and so Anchor is well known for being friendly to homebrewers. Well, they're also friendly to other industry. I called them up and just basically said, I emailed and said, who do I talk to about open fermentation? I just want to get some hints and pointers and stuff like that. I mean, we already had what we were doing because Matt had experience from Matt Cole from Baltimore Brewing. I just wanted to get some other hints and tips and stuff like that. So I emailed. They emailed me back and said, hey, give me a call. And ended up talking like over multiple days.
That's awesome.
Just really, really good people and really willing to share information. But yeah, they do brew more than just that beer.
Yeah. But that beer, I'm telling you, is something special, man. I'm probably going to, just because we're talking about it now, we're recording on a Sunday. Football's going to start here in a few minutes. And, I'm going to go buy a 12-pack of Anchor Steam just to drink with football today.
Yeah, I actually had hoped to buy some and be able to crack it into the microphone here.
Your favorite
But
move.
I'm in Pittsburgh. I'm in Pittsburgh right now at my in-laws' house, and didn't have time to go buy a beer. So
Yeah. Well, let's
maybe
talk a little
afterwards.
bit about what makes not just Anchor Steam, but California Common in general. Talk about what makes it its own style. There are few things I'm as dogmatic about as brewing a California Common. I feel like you said, because it's so similar to other styles, if you start going too far outside of the boundaries of what the description is, and then you start to just not be making a Cal Common. You're just making an amber warm fermented lager or whatever it is. To me, there are some very specific things that need to be done. And I think that for the most part, I think the biggest thing is that you got to have all Northern Brewer hops. And I get a lot of crap for that because I know people like to brew it with Cascade and whatnot, but Northern Brewer to me is the flavor of Cal Common.
Yeah, so I think there's two versions here, right? Do you want to win a competition, or do you want to make a delicious beer? Now, those can overlap. The delicious beer outside of the norms can still win if you get judges who aren't overly restrictive, and if you get some judges that have some imagination. I would say if I had the best version of a California Common, but it had some Cascade, cluster notes, other Native American hops, then I would, if it was the best beer, I would have no problem putting it above a beer that was a Northern Brewer Showcase.
If it tasted like
I
a Cal Common, though. See, that's my thing as well.
Yeah,
If
it has
you
to have the essence of a Cal Common.
Right.
It can't not have anything. But I think, if you look at, like, say, Beersmith, right? We talked about Brad in the beginning. You go down and look at those sliding bars. One or two of them can be too far to the left, too far to the right, but the overall should be down the middle.
Right.
You can play on the margins on one or two. It has to be a somewhat caramely, toasty amber or copper to amber beer. You could probably flirt with brown, but it has to be in that range.
Mm-hmm.
It should be clear. It might have a light haze, maybe, if you dry hop it. I like to dry hop mine.
So do I. Yeah. Or at least big flame out edition.
Yeah. It should have some hop character on the nose, but it's not a bitter or an IPA. So it should have some of that. And the hops should be woody, maybe herbal or floral. And then if you use Northern Brewer, you might have that minty esque character.
Yeah.
But if it didn't have so much, because that minty thing, if it's there, that seems to be the first thing to go away in my experience. So as long as it has, Northern Brewer to me has like that cedary note. It's almost like a cedar, and then it has like this background spice note. It's almost nondescript.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more.
That hop. I love that hop. But what I've found, and even amongst my own beers, is that nuance, those things in the background kind of fade over time, and what you're left with is like this woodsy, cedary character. That's the longest lasting character. So if I got one in competition, I wouldn't be like, oh my God, there's no mint. This is done.
No, yeah. No, I'm with you on that.
And the other hallmarks are that it's drinkable. It's somewhat dry. So despite the little bit of the caramel smoothness and like a hint of sweetness to balance the bitterness, it is dry. So it's like sweet then dry. It's kind of a weird thing, which makes it so delicious, because it's a little bit of sweetness to satisfy you to balance the bitterness, or vice versa, bitterness to balance sweetness, whatever. And then as soon as you're kind of done with the swallow, it's kind of gone, and you're like, oh, I need another one of those. So
yeah.
So it's just a great balanced beer. It's eminently drinkable.
Yeah, it really is. The another kind of hallmark for me, and I've had conversations with local brewers here about my perception of this. I don't think people entirely disagree, but I think my description maybe not be align with theirs. I get a slight mineral, almost just like a whisper of metallic that I really actually enjoy. And it's not metallic though. It's not like the off flavor metallic, like you've got pennies in your mouth, but there's this really intense, to me, I shouldn't say intense, but the noticeable mineral character that I've found is something that you can, I've made versions of Cal Common that don't have that, but the ones that do are the ones that I prefer, and they tend to have a higher amount of, I'm using a higher amount of minerals, particularly gypsum, in my brewing water.
Yeah, so when I do these beers, I try to go with the balanced malty character on like a brewing water, our Beersmith profile. So yeah, I think playing with minerals is a great way to steer that the mouthfeel and the dryness for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So do you,
along with attenuation, of course.
Do you disagree or agree with my this idea that it's got kind of, it's not quite metallic, right? I don't want people to think I'm saying it's got you got pennies in your mouth metallic, but there is this in the best examples that I've had, whether Anchor or other craft breweries. There's this slight mineral thing that is almost, metally a little bit that to me, it makes the beer more drinkable. And the only way I've been able to replicate that is by adding a lot of gypsum. I mean, we're talking, in 15, 16 grams to a 5-gallon batch.
So I don't want to discount that, but I do find that Northern Brewer, the hop, tends to lend a little bit of a minerally character. So I'm not sure if it's what you're saying or if it's the hops. Who knows which one it is? It'd be neat to try to isolate that.
Yeah.
But I think Northern Brewer does have a little bit of a minerally metal-like character.
So maybe because what I've started doing when I make Cal Common, and I have no issues with it, is I use just enough calcium chloride to bring my calcium levels, and to get 50 ppm is my preference, about 50 ppm chloride, and then whatever contribution to the calcium. But then I just throw a ton of gypsum at it, so that I'm almost 3-to-1, 4-to-1 ratio of sulfate to chloride. And I'm way up above, 200 ppm or so sulfate. To me, that's what I've been using, or that's what I've enjoyed, the water profile that I enjoy for Cal Common in particular. But maybe there's something about that water profile that interacts with the Northern Brewer hops as well to produce that kind of super crisp character.
And that's the best part. So like I said, we were talking earlier when we started this little riff here, is it depends on what you want to make. So if you want to make a traditional Cal Common like Anchor does, I think theirs is like 2-row in C50 or C40 or C60. I mean, it's like really simple, supposedly. Now, a lot of the homebrew recipes start flirting with Victory for toastiness.
Oh yeah,
so I think that toasty note is there. Munich for body and breadiness, and pale chocolate for a hint of roast, just a hint. We're talking like 1 ounce, 2 ounces in a 5-gallon batch. So so I love that beer.
I love it
like
too.
That, but it's not exactly like Anchor, but it seems to do well in competitions, and that's because drinking 2 or 3 ounces is different than drinking a pint. And you have to kind of stand out. So sometimes you have to do a little bit of a cartoon. But this is an example of delicious can still win, because that beer, that competition Cal Common, is also great to drink.
Yeah.
And I usually have it, in my kegerator. So it's just a great beer.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a recipe called "What Are We Here For?" that has been made its way, made its rounds on the homebrewers and whatnot. And it's probably one of the more complex grain bills that I've got for a recipe. Like you said, pale malt, Munich malt, Crystal 60, Victory, pale chocolate, 100% Northern Brewer. One of the things that I think a lot of people are looking at when it comes, Cal Common's known for being fermented relatively warm with a traditional lager strain. Of course, all of the labs out there are offering a San Francisco lager type yeast. I believe Imperial calls theirs cable car. I have found in my experience, I've also fermented Cal Common with other lager yeasts, warm. Imagine that. But I've found, at least in my experience, that particular, the Anchor Steam yeast, if you will, does have some unique characteristics to it. To me, it doesn't seem to attenuate as much as other lager yeasts, and it also now I'm going to kind of go off the rails here. It also seems to leave the beer with a bit more body, but I don't think it's sweetness. It's not like that high FG or purportedly the high FG sweetness.
No, it's like a creaminess.
It's like a creaminess, yeah. And I was told in the past that it probably has produces more glycerol or something like that. But that's what I get, is this really almost not thick, but kind of like creamy, velvety experience that is weird, because Anchor Steam doesn't taste like that to me. But I really like what the San Francisco lager yeast does for my Cal Common.
I think once again, as long as you're pulling one lever and not 4 levers, you can change the yeast a little bit. You could do a European ale yeast and absolutely have a great beer. You could do a lager yeast and have a great beer.
Yeah, I have, right.
I would say that you could do an ale yeast and ferment it cold and make a great beer.
Yeah.
You know? Is it going to be Anchor Steam? Maybe not. That is, to me, to make like the best example of a clone of Anchor, I would say San Fran Lager, Northern Brewer, and then some collection, maybe 10 to 20%, character malts.
Yeah.
That will get you there. That will get you. And then which percentages and which one you want to highlight is up to you.
Yeah.
But I would also say you could change out the yeast, and as long as it's not an ester bomb, and as long as it's not austere like a American lager, then it's still a Cal Common.
Yeah. To me, this is not one of those styles that is terribly yeast driven. Though it's in my head I'm thinking it's got to be clean, it's got to attenuate relatively well, because you do want this beer to be, like you said, eminently drinkable. Just to kind of go over the rest of the brewing process that I've used in the past for this when I'm brewing more traditional with using more traditional methods. I tend to mash anywhere between 150 and 152 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm not sure what the conversion is on that right now. And then I'll I think typical mash lengths 60 to 90 minutes just to drive that the extract. And then boil for 60 to 90 minutes, whatever floats your boat there. For my What Are We Here For, it's a 60-minute boil. I do 3 hop additions. I have dry hopped it as well, but my go-to is I push about 31 IBU for the 60-minute Northern Brewer edition. So however much hops it takes for you to get to that. And then I'll throw in about an ounce or 28 grams or so of Northern Brewer with 15 minutes left in the boil. And then another ounce at flame out and let it sit for, steep for about 15 minutes. That's what's worked for me. I have dry hopped, and I've found that because this is one of my recipes that has actually done really well in competition as well. And so I found when I'm brewing for competition, or when I used to, that throwing in that dry hop charge did seem to amplify the Northern Brewer character, which, like you said, it creates kind of this caricature of what a Cal Common is supposed to be.
That's what I did too. I think I did like a quarter ounce or a half ounce of dry hop.
Something really small. Yeah.
Minimal. Yeah. And then I find it. So our recipes are almost identical. I'm like 75% two-row, 10.5% Munich light. I use C40, but I've used C62, like 7%, 4.5% Victory, 2.25 of Cara Munich, and then 0.75% of pale chocolate.
Just a little splash there,
I did percentages, not pounds or ounces. So, and then I get mine on the higher side bitterness. I like around 45, 50 IBUs. It settles out after fining and age. And mine's decidedly copper.
Yeah, likewise.
It's like a 12.5, and mine's like 5.5% alcohol. So it ends up a little bit higher. Once again, I used to brew for competition a lot, so you have to kind of be a little bolder. If I were to brew it for myself, I'd probably do like 4.9%. Keep it even lower drinking, lower ABV for more drinking. Love the beer. I do the 0.25. It's where I would start, maybe up to a half ounce per 5 gallons of dry hop, just for like 2 or 3 days, and that's what I did for the competition. That beer was doing really well locally. It won a couple golds. I think it won a gold at the Monk Melee. It won a couple golds in like Eastern Ohio, and then it didn't even place in trash competition. But I'd already committed to sending it to GABF, so I thought that was kind of funny. Yeah.
Well. So my I guess the last part of the process is packaging and whatnot, and I tend to, like you said, I like my Cal Common as clear as I can possibly get it. So I usually do end up fining it or at least lagering it for a while. And then I carbonate it fairly well. I like it to be nice and, like you said, when you pop the bottle, which I'm not bottling, but you want to get a nice effervescent carbonation on that beer.
They're reported to be a little bit higher carbonated. I don't know. I haven't checked it, but I like them a little more effervescent. I'm with you. I mash in the mid range. I think it's like 62 to 68 C I just converted that. So it's around 150, 155
Yeah.
Fahrenheit. And I do a regular, single infusion. I do a regular boil, like 60 minutes. I think I boil for like 5 minutes until I get protein break, and then I add the hops. So it's like 65-minute boil. And I do lager a steam beer. Not like insane, not like, weeks, but just like, a week or two.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do. I think that's a fairly common approach for Cal Common is to let it spend some time cold conditioning, in the Keys or whatever. So, I brewed my first batch of Cal Common back in 2012 and ended up making numerous iterations with little changes until I eventually settled on the recipe that we just discussed. What are we here for? I've since made that beer exactly as it's written many times. I've also messed around a little bit, and I know that a lot of people have brewed that beer as well. But curious to see what would happen if I made a batch using not so great methods. I made one using our short and shoddy approach. More about that when we return from this break. When dumping wort-soaked grain and leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, did you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge, and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a brew bag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD, that's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brülosophy sent you. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer, and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. When I think about the origins of California Common, I can't help but think of it as, at least to some degree, the first real short and shoddy style. And by that, what I mean is, they took this lager yeast strain, which you're supposed to ferment cool and do all that, and they started fermenting it closer to ale temperatures. Oh, the humanity. Can you imagine? This made me all the more excited to brew it up using even shoddier methods. And so for this one, I did my typical approach using the SS Brewtech 1V electric brewing system, full volume, brew in a bag, and started around 9 o'clock in the morning, one pleasant, I believe it was early summer day. I collected the full volume of filtered water. I do filter my water here just because we have chlorine, and chlorine is icky in beer. I added an unmeasured amount of gypsum to the water in hopes of enhancing that crisp hop character. And then I set the controller to heat the water up and proceeded to weigh out and mill the grains while the water was heating. For the recipe, I went slightly inspired by my What Are We Here For recipe, but I wanted to kind of screw around a little bit as well. to be honest, I actually didn't have some of the grains on hand, which is perfect for short and shoddy. So what I ended up going with was 81% Pelton, that's Mecca grade estate malt, their Pilsner style malt, 12% of their Metolius, which is their Munich style malt, 4% honey malt. And to me, that was sort of replacing the Victory and the C60. 2% Special B. Again, I wanted to get a little bit of that caramel thing, but I didn't have the C60 on hand. And then I did 1% pale chocolate. To me, that pale chocolate, you get that kind of touch of roast, but it's also really nutty. And that's what I was hoping to get from the pale chocolate in this beer. I did a single infusion mash at 150 degrees Fahrenheit or 66 C for a whopping 25 minutes before removing the grain bag, squeezing it until I reached the pre-boil volume that Beersmith told me I needed to reach, and then setting the controller to heat it up. Once the controller was on and the wort came to a boil, I set a timer for 20 minutes and started adding hop additions. Now, because of that reduced boil length, the hop additions obviously had to be adjusted in hopes of getting the bitterness that I was hoping for. So I did 25 grams for first wort hop. So prior to the wort achieving a boil, I threw 25 grams of Northern Brewer in.
Hey, hold on a second. 25. Who freaking adds 25 grams? Just add an ounce, you idiot. 20, go to 20. Go to 28. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
I know. Hey, well deserved. But when you're, you know how it is when you're doing it in grams and you're adjusting by IBU or whatever. So, but sure. I accept the diss over here. So I threw in
carry on.
About an ounce. We'll call it about an ounce. But I did 25 grams first wort hop, and then at 15 minutes left in the boil, I did another 25 grams. And then with 2 minutes left in the boil, I did another 25 grams. So pretty easy hop additions. After the 20-minute mark, when the wort was all done being boiled, I chilled it as quickly as I could to a few degrees above groundwater temperature, which, given the cooler weather at the time, ended up being around 65 degrees Fahrenheit or 18 C. I immediately racked that wort to a sanitized fermenter without letting the trub settle. Now, the SS Brewtech does have that trub dam thing, so it does hold some of that trub back. But there was quite a bit of trub in the wort when it hit the fermenter. Refractometer reading at this point showed that I had hit 1050 OG. So not too shabby. I believe that leaves me with a brewhouse efficiency right around, 60%, 61%, something like that. So that's kind of what I planned for with the reduced mash and the reduced boil. So it worked out for me. Finally, I pitched a single pouch of Imperial Yeast L05 cable car, which again is purportedly sourced from Anchor Brewing. I think all the labs have a version of this. I've used cable car from Imperial numerous times, and I've actually used it for, other styles, not just Cow Common, and it's a fantastic yeast. Again, it does seem, in my personal opinion, to leave a residual kind of creaminess in the beer, which is really pleasant for some styles. The beer-filled fermenter was then placed on a rolling cart in my garage. No firm temp control. I just let it ferment out in my garage during this time of year. At this point, the time was 10:52 p.m. for a total brew day length of under 2 hours. I think that's about an hour and 52 minutes. Not too shabby, eh?
Yeah. That's a good rip, man. That's like extract brewing there.
That's what I tell people is if you don't want to use extract, you can just use these methods, assuming that you like the finished product, and you'll get away with a sub 2 hour brew day. But the temperature of the fermenting beer over the following week ranged from a low of about 62 degrees Fahrenheit or 17 C to a high of about 68 F or 20 C. I think ambient temperature in the garage swayed more, but the volume of the beer, helped it to maintain a more steady temp. That's not too bad for a Cow Common, upwards of 68 degrees Fahrenheit, 20 C. I wasn't too worried about that. After 10 days, airlock activity was absent, so I took a hydrometer measurement showing the beer had reached the 1014 FG target that Beersmith gave me. So I added gelatin directly to the warm beer. This was something I'd never done before. I usually, chill the beer down to 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 C first, add the gelatin, let it sit for 24 hours or so, and then keg the beer. In this case, going as shoddy as I could. I didn't chill the beer first, so it was around that 68 degree Fahrenheit mark or 20 C when I added the gelatin. So I was curious to see if it would work. The next day, I did let it sit out in the garage for a day after adding the gelatin, and then I racked that beer to a sanitized, and I did purge the keg with CO2. That's just a normal part of my process now, and it's so easy. Try to avoid that oxidation. The keg got placed in my keezer for 16 hours of burst carbonation. I do 45 PSI for about 16 hours, and then I'll reduce the gas to serving pressure, purge that keg of all that high pressure, and then let it sit for another 5 days of cold conditioning. And it was at that point that I began serving the beer to tasters for evaluation. Now, on first sight, pouring that first glass of this beer, I was quite pleased with how it looked. A very, very minimal amount of haze. And that's something that I've noticed. Maybe you can speak to this, Malcolm, with beers that I do a reduced mash on. And I don't know if it's because 25 minutes isn't long enough for proteins and whatnot to break down, but I do seem to get just even when I'm finding with gelatin, just a really small amount of haze in some of these short and shoddy beers.
I'm not sure what the magical time is, but I do think on a reduced mash, you tend to get a less clear beer. It's almost definitely protein.
Yeah,
because that's what it would signal to me. I would like to see where that time frame is. I've gotten away with 45 minutes very easily and made a clear beer, but 20 does seem to be pushing the envelope.
Yeah, for mash length you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So there's what I've found is that the reason I've settled on 25 minutes for these, one is that's a perfect amount of time to that lets me get all the hops ready and kind of prep the brew space. But it's also the point at which I've found I can predictably, or I can at least predict what my extract efficiency is going to be. When I was going 20-minute mash length, I might get a 48% brew house efficiency day, and then my next short and shoddy would be 55%, and then the next one would be 58. At 25 minutes, it seems to kind of come together, and I can more I can use a setting in Beersmith to predict what my OG is going to be, basically.
Yeah, it's going to be protein or tannins, and I would like to fool around with the time and temperature. There might be a right temperature for that amount of time, so it might need to be a little lower, so you a little more in the protein range. I wonder, it doesn't really go into the short and shoddy range, but almost like coming in the 140s and then ramping up through, so you hit more, rests. But it doesn't really fall into line with the short and shoddy regime.
I mean, it could,
simple.
mashing in at 140 would be kind of interesting, I think. But at the only other thing that I could think of is that I used most of this beer was made with Mecca Great Estate malt. And some of these craft maltsters, obviously they're using different barley than some of the big maltsters are, and their malting process is a little bit different. So perhaps that played into it as well. Either way, the beer was beautiful, perfect color, nice light beige foam on the top of it. So I was pleased with the way it came out, even with that really minor amount of haze. And I was particularly excited about this batch myself, as this is my first Cal Common, I think, in all of 2019. And I didn't perceive any off flavors in it at all. I was sort of surprised by what I felt was a lack of bitterness and hop character overall in the beer. It made the beer kind of come across to me, at least to my palate, as that sweeter malt flavor was a bit more apparent. I definitely enjoyed the beer, but I'd have to say that, personally, I like the original version a bit more. As I look over the recipe, I'm kind of thinking that I might have not used enough Northern Brewer hops for that first wort hop edition. The about 1 ounce, also 25 grams, should have probably been closer to 45 to 50 grams, I think, in order to get that IBU up in that initial IBU charge up in that 31 to 35 IBU range. But overall, to me, the beer was lacking in that bitterness, that crisp, sharp bitterness that I expect in a Cal Common.
Along with that, too, Mecca Grade malts, they are more characterful in my limited experience with them. So you have to kind of play around with them. They're great malts. They're flavorful, but compared to like a continental European Pilsner, it has more character, and that can be used to your advantage in some ways. Same thing with the Munich. I haven't had their Munich, so I can't speak to that one. But the Special B has kind of a powerful character, and you have 4 ounces of it in there. So I think those things all together could lead to more malty, and sometimes people think that they're malty. They kind of think of it synonymously with sweet, and they're obviously different. But there's definitely some interplay there.
Yeah, I will tell you this. Before, I served this beer to 15 tasters who this is back before we were changed the survey up to tell people what the beer style is. But I won't be using Special B in Cal Common anymore. I felt like that character, that really raisiny, sweet character, even at just 4 ounces, really came through and did.
That's
on
the first
some
thing
level.
I saw.
Yeah, I know. And part of me wanting to do that was, I've got this Special B that's just been sitting on my shelf for the last couple of years. Let's throw it in there and see what it does. I'm glad that I learned not to do it. The beer wasn't bad. The keg went fast, but it certainly didn't have those characteristics that I expect from a good Cal Common. So I served this beer to 15 tasters. Again, they were not informed of what the style was, which looking back now, that's kind of a stupid thing. We now tell people what the style is and then have them evaluate based on their, the BJCP description of the style. But that wasn't the case for this one. And so, beer style identification, that used to be the first question we would ask is, what style do you think this is? One person out of 15 did correctly identify Cal Common, which was pretty cool. But a lot of people guessed styles that were pretty close. The ones that we talked about earlier, alt beer, Dunkel, international amber lager, Czech amber lager, stuff like that. And not to beat a dead horse, but this is a pretty poor indication of how representative the beer was to the style. Hence the reason we removed that question. But it is cool that people are they're in that range on this, at least on this evaluation. In terms of the average characteristic rating, how hoppy, malty, and dry the beer was, tasters seem to think that it was pretty malt forward and dry, which to me is right in line with what I expect from a nice Cal Common. However, I also expect a noticeable Northern Brewer hop character, which, like I said before, and also based on the low hoppy rating, just seems tasters didn't really detect much of.
Other Cal Commons, not using the word steam beer because of the trademark, they're all over the spectrum on the hoppiness. So for a Anchor Steam clone, maybe not, but yeah, for a Cal Common, you could be medium low probably, maybe medium.
Yeah. I feel like this one was low. It was easily the lowest rating that tasters, lowest taster rating. So, well, in terms of characteristic breakdowns, you got hop character, even though it was low, 8 out of 15 tasters felt that the hop character was more earthy. 3 out of 15 felt that there was a melon component to it, which I thought was really interesting, and maybe again had to do with the interaction of that Special B with the low hop character, or whatever. I'm not sure. 2 out of 15 felt that it was floral, and then one person each rated pine, resinous, and fruity. In a more accurate example, in my opinion, I definitely get an earthy, woody thing, and like you said earlier, with that whisper of that like mint in the background. This was all fairly well hidden in the short and shoddy version that I made. It wasn't out front, though I did perceive a very, very slight cooling sensation on my palate every time I would take a sip of it, which I guess I would associate with Northern Brewer. When I think of minty in a hop description, I'm not thinking like peppermint. To me, it's this interesting kind of cooling sensation that makes drinking it again really refreshing almost.
Yeah, the mint. When some people think mint, if you say that to them, they're going to be searching for spearmint, and it's really almost just like this background, wisp of this herbal family that would harken mint. Go try Polaris hops sometimes. That's almost like candy, like mint. It's kind of weird.
It's so weird. I know.
Yeah, the mint from Northern Brewer, when you first open it, it's very pleasant.
Yeah, and it's not spearmint. I mean, that's a good point.
No.
If you're getting spearmint in a beer, you should take the spearmint out of your beer, because that's not what it tastes like. In terms of malt character, and this was the part of, I'm thinking again, Special B. Oh man, I shouldn't have done this. 6 out of 15 tasters rated caramel sweet as being the strongest malt character. Makes sense to me. That's probably what I would rated it as well, as being kind of the lead malt character. 3 people each endorsed cracker/bread crust, toasty, and nutty. I feel like the impression of sweetness was enhanced by that lack of bitterness. Again, the beer just wasn't properly balanced. If you're comparing it to an ideal example of a Cal Common, but that caramel sweet thing really did lead, and that is not, personally, maybe you differ in this, I don't want that to be the kind of the role, the leading role in a Cal Common. I want it to be more toasty.
Yeah, I would say those bars should almost be almost even. It should be nutty, toasty, caramel in line. But, again, Anchor Steam says they only use, I think, 2-row and light caramel.
Yeah.
On their website. So they get a lot of complexity out of their beer for just those two malts.
They really do. I actually, I remember when I was 2012, I had an app on my phone that I would lay in bed, and just design beers on. And I had not brewed Cal Common yet. So I was kind of messing around with, what I'm going to plug into Beersmith later. And it was really difficult to design something without a bunch of malts that landed, everything being in line with where it needs to be stylistically speaking. So the fact that they're able to do that with so few malts I think is impressive. They are the ones who kind of, wrote the book on the style. So, So in terms of yeast character or fermentation character, 9 out of 15, a good majority of people did feel that the yeast character was just clean. I personally agree with that. I didn't get any esters, but 5 out of 15 of the tasters did. And I can't help but wonder if sometimes what we pick up as quote fruity or what we might think are esters isn't just a contribution of the hops or the malt or the interplay of both. 1 out of 15 people put wild. I didn't get that at all. I guess the little bit of special B in there again might have contributed something just a little bit kind of, kind of making you wonder. But the beer, in my opinion, was super clean fermentation.
On those 5 people who put esters, I think if you're serving it to people who judge beer, you're almost hard pressed to get a person with some judging experience not mention esters. So even if it's like, I get some esters.
Yeah.
I think people just kind of automatically do that.
It's like diacetyl. Everybody wants to be the first one.
No, it's even more so than diacetyl.
I know.
It's like, there's some esters. It's an ale, so it's, apples, pears.
Yeah.
It's a Belgian, so it's bubblegum banana.
Yeah.
It's just, and then they just rank it like, low, very low.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's, I didn't have the beer, of course, but I think esters it's part of beer. There's esters in beer.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I actually don't think that, 5 out of 15 people, that's a third of the tasters identified esters as being the most prominent yeast character. I'm not saying they're wrong. I knowing about the beer and how it was brewed and what went into it, I don't think that, at least I can say that I didn't perceive that. The fermentation character was clean. But speaking of diacetyl, we asked tasters to let us know if they thought that, if they noticed anything that they would consider an off flavor. Only 2 of the 15 tasters did. One of them felt that, felt that there was diacetyl in the beer. And one person, interestingly, noted metallic. And I remember talking to this person when they got done completing the survey, and the way that they described it was the way that I perceive that slight metal thing that I enjoy a lot in Anchor Steam. I actually didn't perceive it, but this person did. But only, again, 2 out of 15 people noted off flavors. They weren't huge. I didn't get diacetyl at all. I definitely got a caramel thing, which I do believe a lot of people might perceive as being kind of a buttery diacetyl.
You give 10 people a beer with some caramel in it, or especially the German caramels like Kara Munich, Kara Hell, and you're going to get a diacetyl caramel.
Absolutely, yeah.
Especially if the beer has some age on it.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, especially that slight. I don't even know if it's just oxidation, but you're right. That age thing plus a little bit of caramel. Oh yeah. So, all right. In terms of taster preference, one person preferred this beer a lot. Gave it a 5 out of 5.
That was you.
Yeah, I don't take the surveys, Malcolm. But I'll be honest, it was not me. I have my own rating for this beer. 5 of the 15 people rated it a 4 out of 5. 3 people rated it a 3 out of 5. So there's your good majority of folks right there are 3 out of 5 or higher on a 0 to 5 scale. That's not too shabby. 4 people rated it a 2 out of 5, and then one person gave it a 1 out of 5. And then one final person hated the beer and gave it a 0 out of 5. To me, that just screams the subjectivity of preference, but I do think it's kind of cool to know that, without knowing what the style was, again, we've changed that for surveys that were given out today, but without knowing what the style was or how it was brewed, people did tend to kind of enjoy the beer or at least think that it was decent. We then revealed what the style was and then asked tasters to rank or rate how representative of the style that it was. So I let them know that it was a Cal Common. I did not let them know how the beer was brewed. Nobody felt that it was a perfect example of the style, which I 100% agree with. But 6 people did rate it a 4 out of 5 in terms of representativeness to, I guess a classic Cal Common. So that doesn't seem too bad. Another 5 people rated it 3 out of 5. 2 people gave it a 2 out of 5. One person felt it was a 1 out of 5. And I think the person who just didn't like the beer gave it a 0 out of 5 as well in terms of representativeness. If I were to rate this one, I would probably go in the 2 to 3 out of 5 range, only because it did not have that crisp, that crisp, mouthfeel that I expect from it, along with the Northern Brewer hops, that Northern Brewer hop character and bitterness. So to me, yeah, it was close. It kind of flirted with a Cal Common, but it was, if somebody served it to me, I don't think I would have guessed that it was a Cal Common.
If you gave me a California Common with special bean, I'd probably throw it against the wall.
Well, but you're also a very, let's be honest, you're a very well-trained judge who's been brewing and knows beer incredibly well.
Dick. So
you're a dick.
Yeah. but no, obviously I'm making fun. But
I'll tell you this though, that beer, when it was on tap, people who know me really well, people who I was serving the beer to at House of Pendragon, they loved the beer. I don't know how to. So there's 2 ways of looking at it. You've got it's just an amber lagerish type of beer, and then you've got California Common. I was serving it. The preference rating was taken from people who had no idea what it was. So these are just people saying, this is me asking, do you like the beer? Where do you like the beer? It was a really solid, clean, to all but one person, I guess, clean tasting beer that people really enjoyed. Jersey and Tim couldn't get enough of it. They were, and that doesn't say much. I understand that. But it was a pretty good beer. Now, if I were to rate preference wise, I'd probably go 3 or 4 out of 5. I drank the keg was easy to kick.
So as a beer, right?
As a beer.
Not as a Cal Common.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's totally different. Because remember I did that experiment with the old extract?
Exactly. Yeah.
And it had people rate it without knowing what it was, and people liked the old extract, but they thought in their mind, like, oh, this is a Scottish ale or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
It was supposed to be, I forget what was supposed to be, like a Pilsner or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was supposed to be something like a Pilsner, and then people thought it was a good Scottish ale,
right?
Because obviously the malt had become oxidized and darker.
Yeah. Well, and knowledge of the style is going to impact the way that you perceive the beer. That's why, again, the new survey, and we'll start doing shows on short and shoddy beers that we've brewed using the new survey. People are told up front what the style is. So I do think that that's going to, give us a better perspective in terms of preference. Because if you're rating your preference, knowing what the style is supposed to be, I think you're going to get a more clear picture, at least, of what people think of the beer. So anyways, I said it before, I feel like the increased bitterness and hop flavor may have brought this short and shoddy Cal Common closer to the mark. And I would never use Special B in a Cal Common again. The beer was decent. It was a fun experience. Not the best example of a Cal Common, still a decent beer. Don't use Special B in your Cal Common is kind of my takeaway from this one. All right, Malcolm, we've got a couple of reader comments, not too many on this one, but we'll finish up the episode with these. Jürgen DeFern says, something I've noticed is that standard calculations for hops seem to be incorrect for shorter boil times. One example I have of my own is a triple I made last summer. I did a standard boil, but with only a small bittering addition, and according to the formulas, he says he uses Tinseth, enough at 20 and 10 minutes to get a total IBU of 40. And that gave me a nice beer, but it wasn't bitter. I found one source that said bitterness only really starts to kick in after 50 minutes of boiling.
No.
Yeah, I'm with you on the no on that. I will say that I've made a lot of short and shoddy batches at 20-minute boils that come out perfectly bitter. This one wasn't, and that was odd to me, but I think there are other, explanations for that. I don't think it has to do...
I'll get the numbers wrong, but it's something like 50% of your bitterness is in like the first 15 minutes of the boil. So if you have a 15-minute boil, you're going to pick up most of the bitterness from that charge in the first portion of that, So, and then from there on, so say you're doing like a 30 IBU charge at 60 minutes, you've gotten 15, maybe even more, like 20% of it in the first, 15 minutes. Especially if you have a good rolling boil,
Exactly. I was going to say, isomerization starts happening as soon as those hops hit the boil, as far as I know. And if you're making the proper adjustments. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind is if I'm going for, like I said, around 30 IBU from that 60-minute hop addition, then I'm reducing that boil down to 25 minutes, the amount of hop matter that I'm throwing into that boil for that initial IBU, hop charge that's usually what I would use it for. You're using a lot more, and that is going to contribute arguably more hop flavor as well and aroma. And so you have to kind of adjust for that and keep that in mind as well. Some people, or what I've done in the past when I'm doing these reduced boil batches is I'll get a really clean, something like Magnum Warrior, really clean hop with high alpha, and use that in a smaller amount just to reduce the hop matter in the beer. But my personal opinion on this Cal Common was that the character malts, that Special B and the honey malt, really just kind of overshadowed the bitterness and the Northern Brewer character. And hence I just won't be using those in Cal Common again. But.
So some of my experience at where I'm at now is I've started to get a better appreciation for the mid-level hop additions. I think it might have a mouthfeel contribution, and I think it has a more decided flavor contribution than I previously thought in my home brewing days. And then the pro experience I had before joining Fatheads was all over the place. So it was all these, anywhere from a 3 up to a 20, 30 barrel system, but I'd brew there like once or twice, So with a few exceptions. But being where I'm at now and seeing a lot more beers come through that BrowCon system, and then talking to the brewers and Matt Cole and Chris, I have a better appreciation for what that can be. So I think one of the things that the short and shoddies might not be great at is that mid-level hop contribution, because you're kind of going, you're just making up for it by doing a whole bunch of hops with a shorter boil.
But that shorter boil is basically your mid-level. I mean, you're adding that bittering addition, as it were, and that ends up being your mid-level hop. I don't know. I agree with you. I feel I've said this before that for me, that 25 to 30 minute boil addition in a standard 60-minute boil seems to contribute this interesting kind of like holding up of your later hop addition characters that without that, and my favorite hops to use mid boil are like Fuggles, that the kind of classic earthy English, even noble hops. And there's something about the way that works with later citrusy hop additions that seems to hold it up. And so I'm with you on that. But I don't think I don't this whole 50 minute boiling before bitterness. I'm not convinced that that's the case. But next comment comes from, I think it's Johannes Reppen or Johannes, something like that. I'm going to brew one of these soon, but I have 2 ounces of Laurel, so I might use them as a late hop addition. Then it's not going to be a Cal Common. That's what I have to say about that. You're going to make I love Laurel, by the way. That's a fantastic hop. Go buy it all up because it's so good. I just don't know if you're going to get that Cal Common character without using Northern Brewer. But
that's one of the things we were talking about earlier about adjusting the leverage. You pull 1 or 2 levers, and the beer can still be most of what it is style wise, but there's some kind of like thing you've played with. Now it might not win a competition, but to me, that's one of the great spots for playing around with is you have this amber, bready, toasty beer, the Cal Common, and it's traditionally our especially because of the predominant brand Anchor Steam is Northern Brewer. But I would say go use other classic American not old world, but older hops like
Cluster
hops that were made 60s and 80s. Cluster, Crystal, Galena. A Nugget would be great. And Laurel is a Nugget Glacier hybrid, I believe. So Laurel is a great hop. I think it's a great example of one to use. It might be a little bit played up on the citrus, but that's fine. I think a little bit of that, because I think I've had a buddy of mine made, I think it was more like an American Amber, but it was almost, because he used San Fran lager yeast instead. He used some Cascade, and it was a great beer. I don't think I would have tagged it as a Cal Common, but it was like, it had like the Cal Common mouthfeel and the little roast and breadiness that I liked, and it was dry. So Yeah, I would say freaking rip it and rip it. Try some Laurel. That sounds good.
Yeah, I've had a Cal Common made with Cascade, and I got to be honest, it was really good. It tasted like a Cal Common. It didn't have the Northern Brewer character, but it was still really good. So I get hung up on it just because when I look at Cal Common, the one glaring thing that I get from it is the Northern Brewer hop character. Other people might view it like you said. There are various things that make a Cal Common, and maybe by adjusting just that one lever, you still got 95% Cal Common. So
it's quite unique in a beer that it's almost singularly defined by a single example.
Yeah. It is very unique in that respect. I agree with you. All right. Final comment comes from Reddit user Boarshead72. He says, does the California lager yeast add anything specific to the style that would be lost if 3470 was used instead?
I think there's a little bit of esters, and I don't know. So 3470 is super forgiving. So it's not a high sulfur producer in my experience anyways, but it does kick some. So it'd be interesting to try.
I've done it before. I've actually, and I've used the Imperial. I think Global is their Weihenstephan, their version of 3470. I've used 3470. I've made a lot of Cal Common in my day. I love this style. Yeah. The difference is, so I don't know if I did a side by side or not. So this might just be anecdote on my part, but I don't think that you have to use that. This is one of the places where I'm kind of flimsy. I don't think you have to use, cable car or whatever the Cal lager yeast is to make a good Cal Common. 3470, that the Weihenstephan strain, Global, Urkel, Harvest, I think you could get away with making a really good example using those yeasts. But in my experience, that when I fermented with a pouch of 3470, the beer had a much crisper, thinner, in not in a bad way, but like a thinner mouthfeel to it. It was much more lager-like, really, is what it was. And I fermented it at 66F, which is 19C. And I've actually done this multiple times, like I said, with different yeast lab versions of Weihenstephan.
What temperature?
66F, 19C.
Yeah. So I would wonder if you did like a 3470 in the high 50s. I think you might coax out some more esters. It's still going to be slightly more attenuative.
It was
so
too.
It might still be drier. Yeah. But that's something that could be played with. I would not doubt that someone could mess around with 3470 and get it to perform in an acceptable way.
I believe so I competed with a Cal Common 4 or 5 years ago, NHC, and I believe I scored a 41 on a Cal Common. I'm almost certain it was the one that I fermented with Global, either Global or 3470, whatever that Weihenstephan strain was that I used back then. And the reason I did that was because in my head, you when you're competing, a part of what you're doing is you want all of those, everything to be amped up a little bit because, you're in a flight of 7 other, beers potentially, and you want yours to be the standout. Well, in my head, I'm going, well, it's a Cal Common. What I want the standout portion to be is drinkability. I want it to taste great, but I want that drinkability to be notable. And so the 3470, that Weihenstephan yeast, to me, really did kind of amplify the drinkability component to it, even though cable car or, Cal lager yeast produces a highly drinkable beer as well. There is that kind of creamy thing, which can mess with, I don't know, especially if you're drinking in a lineup of other Cal Commons, can kind of mess with that perception of, crushableness.
Yeah, especially because, like I said, judges, not all of them, there's some very good judges out there. Some of them will get wrapped into this, is this beer anchor steam, right?
Exactly.
It happens with a lot of different beers. I think one of the worst examples is Cal Common. So they start doing, is this anchor steam? Just like back in the early 2000s, you do an American Pale Ale, people would be like, is this Sierra Nevada? I think now people have played around with American Pale Ale more, so they don't sit there and search for Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. But with Anchor Steam being so popular and so revered, you have to get judges who are willing to accept things on the outskirts and their fringes if you're doing for competition. If you're just making delicious beer, 3470 would be amazing.
Yeah, it works great. I can tell you firsthand experience, it works fantastic. Well, I'm very thirsty for some Cal Common now. Thankfully, football starts in about 45 minutes. I think I am going to go grab a 12-pack myself, sit around and watch some football. Is there any final thoughts that you've got on California Common or the short and shoddy method before we head out, Malcolm?
The short and shoddy method, yes. I would say, there's a lot of things that can be played with there. You know, we talked about adjusting the boil a little bit, adjusting your mash temperatures a little bit. It doesn't have to be 2 hours. It's not a race. You can be 2.5. You can 3. Do
Absolutely.
what works for you.
Yeah.
On the Cal Common aspect, so Anchor Steam is one of my favorite beers as far as because of the place it holds in American craft brewing.
Yeah.
And it's just darn delicious. But I would challenge people to go out and try some of the other examples just so you learn more about where those levers are that I said you could play with and change the edges a little bit. So try Flying Dog Old Scratch, try which is an amber lager. Try Schlafly Pie Common. I'm not sure if they still make that, but that was a good beer. Steamworks Steam Engine Lager is an amazing beer. Go find it. That's a great beer. So it's more lager-like for sure. But those beers are also in that realm of Cal Common. So I would go try those.
Absolutely. I've never heard of the Steamworks one, so I'm excited to look for it. My last bit of advice, just don't use Special B in a Cal Common, and I think you'll be safe. All right, remember to head over to brülosophy.com to read about the recipe discussed in this episode, as well as all of the other stuff we're up to. The Brülosophy Podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brülosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brülosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brülosophy Podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.